This is commentary advice for either someone who missed the initial class where we covered a student exemplar in the rubric, or if you want a reminder of the components of the commentary. So what is a commentary? It's part of your internal assessment for the IB. It's a weighting, whether you're standard level or higher level, it's 20%. It should take approximately 20 hours in total to complete. And basically, it's an analysis of a current newspaper article with a maximum of 750 words from the viewpoint of being an economist and very much sounding like an economist analyzing the article. You'll submit 3 different commentaries for your portfolio over the 2-year program, and they'll be from 3 different sections. Now, typically what we end up submitting is one from microeconomics, one from macro, and one from international economics. Typically, we cover development economics too late in order to submit a commentary for the portfolio. An exception to that could be if you're a geography student and you've been covering a lot of development issues already. Each article has to be from a different source, so it's important to track what newspaper you've used and can't be older than a year from the date that you write the commentary. And the commentary is to cover various topics from the IB syllabus. The articles, they can be from a newspaper or journal or the internet, but mustn't be from television or radio broadcasts. If the article is particularly long, which they discourage, the student must highlight the sections of the article which are being used. Also, the article preferably should be in the same language that the commentary is written in. However, if you do choose a foreign article, you need to provide an accurate translation of the whole article and also the original article. Each commentary, this is important, explains the linkages between the article and economic theory. So it's very much taking the IB economic concepts and applying it to the article. You need to demonstrate economic insights into the implications of the article. Again, as I was saying, you're looking at current events from the viewpoint of an economist. On the commentary, you must record the title, the source, the date. And it's important if it's from the internet, include the date of access to the site from the internet, because sometimes articles do morph. The word count, and the section of the syllabus to which the article relates. Later on, when we show a student exemplar, there'll be a sample cover sheet which includes this information, and this is also the cover sheet itself is posted on Blackboard, which you'll get that information a little later on in this presentation. The word limit is 750 words, not to exceed that, and the IB will not read beyond that. So not only will you be penalized if you go over 750 words, but the examiner will strike through and not read the rest of it. I'll leave this for your future reference in terms of what is not included in the word count. You can come back to this. So each portfolio must contain this cover sheet that we were talking about. Sorry, that's the portfolio cover sheet, my apologies. And then each individual commentary has the cover sheet, and that individual cover sheet is on Blackboard, and then we'll make reference to the summary portfolio cover sheet in March of your final year when you go to submit your portfolio. So you'll be submitting the 3 commentaries accompanied in each case by the article. So typically how you go about doing a commentary is that you search for a newspaper article using key terms from the syllabus, so typically things like demand and supply, tariffs, appreciation, inflation, depending on what area of the syllabus that you're working from. And once the article has been approved by your teacher, I can't emphasize enough that you save a copy of the article, whether you put it into a Word document or you print it and save a hard copy. But if you save just the URL or the website address, that's often not good enough, because very often the article disappears, which is tremendously frustrating for the student, or it goes behind a paywall and you don't necessarily want to sign up for a whole subscription to a newspaper. Although if something does go behind a paywall, you can always check with your teacher to see if the school has a subscription for that particular newspaper. Also, when asking your teacher to approve the article, don't just send the link. Send a brief outline with the economic concepts you'll be using. So for instance, if it was micro, you might be looking at demand, supply, elasticity of demand, perhaps market failure with pollution, and so on. And then you submit a first draft to your teacher for approval. You can get feedback on one draft, but only on one draft. Here's the marking rubric over the next several slides. And we're going to see how this marking rubric applies to the student exemplar. So if we look at diagrams, and I'll look at the highest marking mark band, or the highest mark possible in each of these cases. You want relevant, you want accurate and correctly labeled diagrams with a full explanation. You never want the reader to have to interpret what's happening with price. So for instance, if you were going to say that price increased, if you have price increasing from P1 to P2 on your graph, actually state that the price has increased from P1 to P2. Also, diagrams should typically follow what you're talking about, not have it before, so that the reader knows which diagram belongs with which paragraph of writing. Also, if there is any information in the text with specific quantities or a certain percentage increase, the IB loves it when you actually mark that down on the diagram and include actual data. Terminology. It says that terminology relevant to the article is used appropriately throughout the commentary, but what they also mean by this is not only are you using the terminology, but you're giving very precise definitions right in the body of the text of the commentary. Application. Relevant economic concepts and/or theories are applied to the article appropriately throughout the commentary. What I'd like to emphasize here is that it's very, very clear that you are analyzing the article. So for example, if the article is on tariffs, which is a tax on imports, it's not sufficient to give textbook theory on what tariffs are, who they hurt, who they benefit, where the extra revenue goes, and so on and so forth, without making actual reference to the article itself. So they don't want you to just regurgitate textbook theory. And a way of proving to the reader or the examiner that you are applying it to the article is to use quotes. So to sprinkle quotes throughout your commentary is a very, very effective way of showing that you are actually analyzing the article. In terms of assessment, there's effective economic analysis relating to the article. And once again, I would strongly suggest you to quote the article as you are going through your analysis to prove that, again, it is related to the article. And lastly, evaluation. Judgments are made that are supported by effective and balanced reasoning. So in this case, make sure that you're very familiar with what evaluation is in economics. So advantages, disadvantages, short-term, long-term, the viewpoint of different stakeholders being typically consumers, low and high income, producers, the government, and if you're doing international economics, often other countries, or prioritizing the arguments. Why is something very, very important, or why is something really quite trivial? So the student exemplar. So what we're going to do is show you an excellent student exemplar, starting off with their cover sheet. I'm only including the first half of the article that they used so that you're able to read it, but the student had included the entire article and had just drawn a line and said has been used up to this point. And then when you go through this, try to tie in with the rubric why this is a particularly good commentary. So here is the front cover sheet. We have something that's very similar to this, and this the copy that we use can be found on Blackboard under course material, and it's the first file. Here is the first half or the first part of the newspaper article that was used. You can see that it's not terribly long, but very, very meaty in terms of the economic concepts that the student was able to pull out and analyze. So this is the beginning of the commentary. The student jumps right in to talking about how dumping is the selling of goods and services on foreign markets below their cost of production. So the student has given a precise and accurate definition and has gone right into the economic analysis. The student then goes on to say China and Germany have been accused of dumping thermal paper on American markets. So you're given a context of what is happening in the article. It's very short and sweet. You don't get any marks on descriptive passages of what is happening in the world. You want to get right to the economic analysis. The student goes on to talk about how the Chinese and German governments have subsidized their domestic industries. And once again, a definition is put right into play, where when governments offer advantages such as payments to firms to lower their costs of production. So again, they're very, very precise in terms of their definition, and it slid right into the commentary. They talk about them being able to export goods at a price P dumping, lower than the normal cost of production, P world, and this will become very apparent on the diagram which follows. So here is the diagram. The diagrams were commented on being very accurate and well drawn, so the IB examiner liked this. There are the prices, the P domestic, P world, and P dumping that the student had made reference to. And as we carry on through, you'll see on the next slide that the student will make reference to what has happened to quantity, making reference back to the graph, again, not having the reader do any of the interpretation of the graph. So the student goes on to say that America's paper market contained no trade barriers to import before this, and so the quantity supplied domestically would decrease from Q2 to Q1. So there we have it, that the student is telling you what has happened to quantity and not having you, the reader, interpret this. They talk about domestic paper producers not being able to compete with the subsidized Chinese producers. And here comes their first quote. This has caused 20% of the industry to be lost in 7 years. So it's very clear that the student is analyzing the article, and the quote there is backing that up. In terms of evaluation, you don't want to leave evaluation to the end. You want to pepper it through the entire commentary. So here's the first piece of evaluation. The worst hit are the American workers because they have little skills that can be transferred. And so the workers that held 118,000 paper industry jobs that have disappeared are likely to remain unemployed. So a nice piece of evaluation there. Who is affected the most? So we're looking at a viewpoint of different stakeholders and to a certain extent prioritizing the arguments. The student then goes on to talk about another economic concept, again right out of the IB syllabus, of structural unemployment, and saying that it will be difficult for the American government to deal with it because it will require retraining and other large employment initiatives. So again, some evaluation sprinkled in, definitely some analysis is there. And again, the viewpoint of different stakeholders, we're looking at the Chinese producers now benefiting from greater share. Again, having you make reference to the graph, but not having you interpret the graph. The numbers are there for you. And then lastly, they talk about the viewpoint of consumers and other industries that use thermal paper and what their benefit will be in terms of the lower prices and lower costs of production. So again, the evaluation right there. Again, some economic analysis, talking about U.S. paper companies have become the most efficient, and talking about absolute advantage over China and Germany. The U.S. is said to have an absolute advantage if, and so they go on and define what absolute advantage is, but also explaining some of the economic theory. They go on to say to protect their industry and avoid unemployment, what the U.S. Trade Commission has done, which is to place tariffs on imported thermal paper. Again, a definition of what a tariff is, a tax on imports. And again, not having you interpret the graph, but telling you what is going to happen to the supply curve. Here is the graph. The examiners liked the use of the shading in, they liked the use of the color, and then this will be made reference to in the following passages. So the price of thermal paper will rise, and there it is, telling you what that is. And then at this point, I'll let you read the rest of this on your own. But putting in the symbols, the green and the yellow triangles and the red rectangle and what that represents, again, the IB found that very easy to follow, and we're quite impressed by the use of the graphics. And this is the last slide that I'll let you read. And again, you can surmise why this scored so well. And in fact, this student got a perfect score. And as the examiners explained in their marking copy, that it doesn't mean that the commentary itself was perfect. There were a few flaws in some of their presentation, but in terms of what a high school student could be expected to produce, they absolutely got top marks.